Hi, thank you for joining me again in this series on 7 things I learned from my dad. This is the second in the series. There will be a link in the post to the previous video clip. Today, I want to talk about the second thing that I noticed in a very conspicuous manner about my dad, and that is this: dad had a reading culture. I always say this: if you do not have a reading culture, you are not preparing yourself for growth. Readers grow. One thing I noticed about dad was he read to grow, and he didn't just read to know. Too many people read to be puffed up. They read to show what they know so people can see they know so many things about so many topics. But dad was very deliberate in his reading. When I gave my life to Christ, one of the things I did was just raid his library. We had shelves with books in them, and there were books from authors like F.F. Bosworth. That was the first time I came across the great classic Christ the Healer by F.F. Bosworth. It was in my dad's library. I read that book many, many years back now, and it still remains a classic today. But dad was reading that kind of material then. I also came across books by Kenneth E. Hagin in there, books from different authors. But dad was always reading. And one thing that struck me is that in a lot of the books, almost every page was underlined. These were signs of someone who was reading, assimilating what he was reading, and was processing it. A lot of times there will be comments by the side of the book about what he had read in the book. And even some of those, on some of the material that I still have access to today, continue to be a blessing. But there is a folly that has hit this generation. We think that the abundance of information means that you are now knowledgeable about a topic or a point. Not necessarily. When you read on a particular topic until you are able to reproduce what you're reading. Read to a point where that knowledge has transformed you. Build that reading culture. Make sure that you have an attention to detail, not just skimming over the material. Like I said, almost every page in a lot of these books were marked. It was obvious that dad had been through the material. And he wasn't just reading so he had material he could teach on Sundays, or so he had materials he could preach on Sundays. He was genuinely reading to transform his life. And looking back now at what dad did, it's very obvious that reading had an impact on him. So you find out that it took a conscious effort to move from the medical books he used to read. Dad was a consultant pediatrician, and read a lot of Christian material that was actually transforming his life. And I think anyone who desires to grow needs to have a reading culture. Without a reading culture, you can be sure you may be loaded with information, but there will be no growth. Real growth comes from reading. Real growth comes from being deliberate about how you associate with material. After all, the Bible is a book as well. You know, dad spent so much time in the Bible. We had so many Bibles in the house. And yet again, as you went through all the different translations, you would see dad's markings on them, dad's notes on them. Some of those Bibles were old, they were worn, but it just showed that he was reading. So, make sure you are a reader, and I'm sure it will transform your life.